What?
Said, I wonder why you're excited about that year.
1848.
All right, so what's you get recorded like almost every day. Yeah, you're just aware of it more. Why do I pick you?
Because first period has Sam.
No.
Yeah, Sam.
I'm afraid he'll swear at first period.
Because first period is where I get the kinks out. You know, so if I mess up, I might still get some kinks out this period. By seventh period, I'm pretty good.
Why don't you go seventh period?
Well, because if there's a technical issue that goes on during fourth period, I still got seventh period as backup. If I record seventh period and there's some kind of technical glitch, I don't have a backup. So.
It's just the AP go.
AP go.
Honestly, I was thinking of that when I wasn't here.
This is what's going on.
All
Right, so for number one, we're probably not going to get through everything that's on this piece of paper, and if you flip it over on the back, would be Wollstonecraft's personal timeline. So, like, she's born in 1759, and then if you go to the last date, you can pretty much guess what happens in 1798. You were wrong.
Is there a particular reason that we're taking such detailed notes on?
Yeah, and the reason for it is that, well, first off, for Quiz on Friday, this is not it. There's not going to be a series of dates where you have to fill in what happened on these specific dates. But with Henry David Thoreau, no, I don't think like our background for what's going on in the 1840s is like really, really strong, but we start going over a few things, talk about slavery, Mexican-American War. It makes sense. We know the context of it. Civil rights movement, we're pretty good with mentioning those things and understand what's going on. I don't think all of us are going to be super familiar with things that would be going on, even though this isn't all within Wollstonecraft's timeline. Only the first two happened during her lifetime. This 75-year period that we have going on with that era, it's really the era of like revolts and revolutions are taking place, which is pretty significant with what's going on for her. So the stuff that gets mentioned in here, some of it can and does come up within the passage, especially Jean-Jacques Rousseau is a name that she throws around quite a bit. But there's not like a hidden message about the year of 1815 within this document since it gets published in 1792. But it's more for making sure that we're all kind of like on the same page with what would be going on during her, not necessarily lifetime, but at least during the era in which she's living. So mention to you that, you know, with the era in general, you're taking a look at pretty much the age of revolt and rebellion, not counting Jesse's fascination with the last date, 1848. I'm guessing at least two of them, like with the first two, there could be some specific rebellions that would come to mind, or revolutions that would come to mind when we go, hey, what happened in 1776? And Emma already said something about one of them when she came in.
Oh, the Declaration.
Okay, so we're dealing with the American Revolution in 1776. I did not put 19.
Doesn't really do much for women.
17, 18. Revolution, is it 17? It's. I feel like the revolution starts in 17 and then 18 is when like the government switches over, but I might be wrong.
It takes a second for them to actually switch over, so yeah, there's that year.
Starts in 17. How about 1789? We got the American Revolution, and then we have the French Revolution. Now, aside from the obvious answers of, well, one happened 13 years after the other, and one took place in America, and one took place in France, what would be differences between those two revolutions? Like, what would be characteristics that would distinguish one from the other, besides Americans, Frenchmen? Okay. So, and this might be kind of twisting what you're going a little bit, but the French Revolution is very much an internal revolution where, you know, it's all happening within the same area, where here it's a little bit of external because you have colonies which are trying to separate from Great Britain, so there's a definite boundary separation between the two where they're trying to escape their role. and you have the whole representation or taxation without representation and all that stuff going on. But French Revolution internal within the boundaries. This one you're taking a look at in today's world. We would look at two different countries. Although if you were living in Great Britain in 1774, you might still look at the colonies as being part of your nation. What else? That's certainly a big one.
The French Revolution didn't go well.
French Revolution was really violent. It killed lots of people. The American Revolution was violent, but not against the
So here
but not against the people. They put power.
you have Reign of Terror. So obviously there is a lot of violence taking place. As mentioned, American Revolution, it's a little bit, it's still violent. I would say Reign of Terror, the violence that you have going on in the French Revolution is probably more chaotic, where this is kind of organized violence in a way, you know, if that's a way of putting it. Anything else? If you're a European citizen outside of France, which one of the two is more significant to you? If you're living in Europe,
French.
why do you think, Zach?
Because it's right there, next door to you.
So proximity to it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I think that would certainly be part of it. Any other reasons why the French Revolution would be more, maybe not just significant, but even more concerning? You know, that might even be a way of putting it.
It's more.
Yep.
Because they got rid of the entire royalty.
So if you were to, there we go. Who versus whom with the French Revolution? Like if we're looking at classes or groups. So on one side we have the monarchy. On the other side you have more of, you know, the commoner, or like the mob revolution is kind of taking place, the everyday person. Who's revolting against whom in the American Revolution? Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Adams. They're really all part of what class? They're the upper class. It's the aristocrats, or aristocats if you're watching Disney movies, versus the aristocrats. Still the monarchy, you know, certainly taking place. But you have a whole different dynamic where you have essentially two equals are going against one another within the American Revolution from a society, from a class standpoint. This one is frightening. This is the one that absolutely terrifies Europe, terrifies a lot of the governments because of the idea of, wait a minute, what if that were to happen here? What if the common people decide to kind of rise up and try to overthrow us? This could be really problematic. And so if you're, and Zach's certainly right with the proximity, it's going to be more significant because it's right there. The fact that it's right there, it could be more influential to other people who are, you know, more of the commoner middle class. And if you're upper class, part of the monarchy, this could be rather unsettling because who knows what could happen here. So people in England are certainly aware of what's going on and are kind of paying pretty close attention because what if a similar thing were to happen? And folks in other nations are certainly going to be doing the same thing. Now there is a little bit of a collective sigh of relief in 1815 because 1815 is when we get the end of the Napoleonic Wars. And you have, for the most part, you know, order is restored when Louis the 18th, I believe, comes back to power. It's definitely what?
It's definitely after 14.
It is after 4. Do you remember when you learned Roman numerals?
Like elementary.
Never.
Honestly, I learned it from
We learned them in
Star
game.
Wars.
We learned them in game.
Yeah, it could be. Like, Addie's in 5th grade and has no concept yet of how Roman numerals work, and I feel like you should know this.
I don't remember when I
I
learned it.
learned
I
it
didn't
from
learn it.
I learned Star Wars.
And we're in Latin. So.
Yeah.
Nina,
What I did?
shame
all
on
have
you.
to.
Oh my gosh! No, like when we would do that in Mr. Washington's class last year, he would just like
I already told you what happens when a French general throws a hand grenade in a kitchen, right?
No.
You get linoleum blown apart.
That's pretty good.
Come on.
Hey, I had
That's better than I expected.
say that.
Jesse, we'll skip 1832 for now.
Yes.
What happens here?
Karl Marx was the Communist Manifesto.
You're not gonna like throw a shout out to Engels? Like it's all going Marx.
What?
Well, he
Yeah.
kind of.
You're not gonna throw Engels in there too? Just
Nah,
no.
he's not worth it. They were just, everyone was just.
We have an aristocratic revolt taking place here, American Revolution. We have more of the common mob revolt taking place with the French Revolution. Not that the Communist Manifesto all of a sudden becomes, okay, new revolution taking place, but what's kind of the group of people that we're looking at now? Which, like, for our terms, yeah. And if you, if you're reading 1984, the proletariat gets mentioned quite a bit with the proles and whatnot. But yeah, you're pretty much looking at the working class revolt. And, I mean, you have a whole string of manifestos that then start to spring up all throughout Europe, United States, when it comes to working classes and whatnot. There's the Pittsburgh Proclamation of 1883, which is kind of one of the first, like, Union proclamations that has taken place. So certainly this does tend to be pretty influential. The one in 1832, this is within the context of Great Britain. I have no idea how familiar anyone would be, if at all. But 1832 is significant legislation within British Parliament when you have the Great Reform Act.
I think we learned about these.
Yeah, probably.
This part of stuff that.
You remember anything about it? It's as opposed to the, average Reform Act. This is the great one.
There's a ton of things about Parliament that
Yeah.
so similar that.
Essentially what this does, in as simple terms as possible, is it gives a better representation in Parliament in regards to the everyday population of England. So a lot of the lords who are in Parliament in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and it's been this way for many, many years, you have a lot of boroughs, which is going to be more of the rural countryside. The issue is the voting group or the electors in those boroughs tend to be nobles. So, if we have Lord Cleric, the wise, as opposed to the other one, who knows what that one is. But Lord Cleric could have control over multiple boroughs, which would mean the Cleric family could have control over multiple members of Parliament. So in a way, like one voter is determining who 3 or 4 representatives within Parliament would be. Larger cities, Birmingham, Sheffield, Manchester, may have limited, if any, representation within Parliament. Keep in mind what's different about like economics in Great Britain and a lot of what we would consider to be first world countries now in the 1830s compared to the 1630s. The economy has become much more. What's it based on? I mean, 1700s, 1800s. We were saying we have what kind of revolutions taking place within economics. We have industrial revolution. So most of your gross income and whatnot. Manufacturing is happening in urban places. We're going away from agriculture. We're going into industrial, issues. Manchester, at the time of this, large city in England, 0 representation within Parliament because it basically has not been redistricted. So, in some ways, the Great Reform Act of 1832, it is done to avoid having something like this happen in Great Britain. We need to give the average people more representation within government so that we don't have this kind of uprising starting to take place. So again, the important thing is not so much memorizing all the dates and whatnot, But when Wollstonecraft is writing her ideas, is coming up with her own, viewpoints with things, and certainly she's looking at more gender issues than anything else. It's the age of reforms taking place, so it kind of makes sense for her. If she's alive 50 years earlier, who knows if those ideas really kind of spark as much, because it's not that age of really trying to look at change and revolts taking place. Keep in mind with Wollstonecraft, as you start to read, the main thing that she's looking at is education. She is not clamoring and arguing for equal rights. She's not looking for places within Parliament. She's not looking even really for financial total equality, although she would be looking for financial independence. Her argument would be that women need to be educated just as men are. Her primary focus group is going to be the wealthy women, the wealthy females, those within the aristocratic families, because they would have the means, the access to education. She's going to be very upset with a well-to-do female in Great Britain who has no desire to be educated, more so than a poor commoner who doesn't have the means to. So she feels that education is a way for women's ideas to be understood. The real impetus behind her writing of a vindication of the rights of women probably comes back to a guy by the name of Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke's a British writer, philosopher. After the French Revolution takes place, he publishes a pamphlet entitled A Reflection on the Revolution in France. It's a catchy title. This gets published in 1789 when the French Revolution is taking place. So you have a British citizen writing about the French Revolution. 50-50 guess. Do you think he's in favor of the French Revolution or is he against it?
Against it.
Why? Because I guessed.
You said it's 50-50. It's probably not against it. Yeah. What did you against being against?
No, he's just against it. The main reason that he is against it is he wants to avoid societal chaos, from ensuing. There is an order to things. Revolutions like this disrupts that order, the natural flow of things. So in 1790, because if you publish one thing, then someone has to publish something back. In 1790, a pamphlet is published entitled A Vindication of the Rights of actually men.
I think we mentioned this in who wrote it? Yeah.
Vindication of the Rights of Men gets published. I want to say it's about 3,000 copies. So it's a significant publication that takes place. It's not a book, it's a little pamphlet. It sells out within a matter of like 2 weeks. So what does a publisher do when your first printing sells out? You print more so you can make more money. It is very widely acclaimed, and all the major literary reviews are reading it. It's not like just one random person says, hey, this is nice. It is being widely read. It is widely accepted. They come out with a second edition. And the second edition just meaning a second printing. It's not that there's really any changes taking place. There is one subtle difference, though, that happens on the title page of the pamphlet. The first one was written by a very well-known author, who I'm sure the name is right on the tip of your tongue. Begins with an A. It's not Alex, I'm sorry. This person has written many things over the years. The second printing is not written by anonymous. The second printing has a name. Second one has Mary Wollstonecraft as the author. Mary Wollstonecraft writes a vindication of the rights of men. It is basically a counter-argument, not basically, it is a counter-argument to this. Basically going that men have natural rights, and one of those rights is basically not to be controlled by other people in the natural order of things. You don't have class structure, it's not that you were born into a certain way, but you have the ability to ascend, to move throughout classes and all that kind of stuff. So when Anonymous publishes it, it is well received and well regarded. when the name Mary Wollstonecraft gets attached to it, now, what's the main criticism?
She's a woman.
Indirectly. But it's not, well, it was written by a female, so therefore it's going to be bad. So that would kind of be the
What
implied
would she know
argument.
about the rights of men?
The argument is that Burke's response, not Burke's response, but Burke's publication is rational, whereas her argument is too emotional. So there are certainly biases that would be taking place with it. Now again, the first time that it gets reviewed, hey, this argument makes sense, there's no problems with it. When Wollstonecraft's name gets attached to it, that's when it becomes that it's too emotional. Now, 1791, there's another pamphlet that gets published. It's not called A Vindication of the Rights of Men, but it's just called The Rights of Men. And that one gets published by a male author, who I bet you guys know. Also did Common Sense,
Oh, Tommy.
Thomas Paine. And Paine and Wollstonecraft know each other, and it's not that Paine's plagiarizing Wollstonecraft's argument or anything like that, but he takes the argument and continues to extend it, to build upon it, at which point, it pretty much gets applauded for everything that's going on. So when you have Vindication of the Rights of Men is basically being turned down because of Wollstonecraft being the author, that's when she then comes out 2 years later with A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, where she is now looking at the differences between men and women and why those differences, while there might be some biological, physical differences between the two, doesn't mean that there would be any intellectual limitations that would exist for female gender. She's really certainly concerned about what the options would be for women in 1792. They're pretty few and far between. If you're a woman of age, you could become married, at which point you need to produce an heir and a spare. So basically you have to have male children. You could be unmarried. However, if you are unmarried, you cannot open your own business, you cannot move into your own apartment, you cannot own anything because you don't have a legal right to. So if you're unmarried, you live with male relatives. Guess who's really not happy if you have to move in with your brother? Not your brother, your brother's wife. Because now it's another, and while yes, might be able to help out with duties, it's another responsibility that's being placed on the wife. Even though the brother would have to proclaim, to sister. Or it could be a male cousin, if not father. And then the other option that you would have, well, you could argue too, and they kind of go in opposite directions, could be prostitution, or you could be going to a convent. One is obviously a health hazard. The other one, you're still surrendering, rights of property and things of that nature. So women really have limited, if any, legal rights in 1792. It's not until the 1850s, I think it's 1857 in Great Britain, when women can file for divorce and legally do so. But you have to prove a whole bunch of stuff, which you're probably not going to be able to prove. And it's not until 1884 that you're able to kind of start to do more modern divorce in the way that we would look at it, but your rights are still going to be very limited. So she's looking at education as a way for women to be able to gain recognition. If women are able to prove themselves in an intellectual method, then the lack of property rights and things of that nature could start to change a little bit. A name that she really goes after a good bit in her chapter that you have is going to be Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the French writer, philosopher. He has a couple texts that are pretty significant. He has one called The Social Contract that gets published in 1762. He also has a novel, which is really kind of meant to be more of a training manual. And the novel is entitled Emile. It's about a character named
Emile.
Good job. Emile is a boy. Emile grows up throughout it's broken up into like 5 books within the novel. It's basically the training and the education of Emile. The part that she really takes, does not take kindly to, is later in the book when Emile is introduced to Sophie. Sophie is going to be Emile's wife. Sophie has to be educationally trained in order to be an appropriate spouse for Emil. So the education of women at this time the main idea that Rousseau throws out is that women must be able to trick their husbands into being happy. Rousseau argues if women don't trick their husbands into being happy, husbands will naturally become unhappy. If husbands become unhappy, they'll leave their spouses. They leave their spouses, social order will start to break apart, chaos will ensue, children won't be raised properly. It's kind of, and obviously not the same argument, but it's kind of harkens back to, remember Charles Colson when we read the 2 articles on same-sex marriage? Similar, very conservative viewpoints with it. So Wollstonecraft's basically going, wait a minute, the sole education that needs to take place for a woman is for her to be submissive, is for her to, be involved in trickery, to make sure that her husband is happy. You're certainly limiting the capabilities of what could happen. So her main element is not just education of women, but she's certainly looking for more formal or traditional education of women. Wollstonecraft grows up in a middle-class family. They have access, though, to a lot of literature, texts, and books, and so that's where her kind of yearning desire for education takes place. Her father does squander their wealth, and so the family kind of starts to fall apart. You guys did Importance of Being Earnest, right, back in like 9th grade. She would be similar to, I think Miss Prism is the governess that has to watch over Cecily and all those kinds of things. So she takes on kind of the role of things. It's like tutor and all that kind of stuff. So she is certainly influential with being, access to literature, intellectual, sophisticated philosophical circles, which really kind of spurned her ideas. Wollstonecraft's problem is her personal life is messy and complicated. She dies 10 days after childbirth to her second daughter, Mary Wollstonecraft, also is her name. She becomes Mary Shelley, author of Frankenstein. Her husband publishes memoirs about Wollstonecraft and her life. Her life at that time would be considered very scandalous, so most of her ideas are basically discredited for about 150 years because people focus on the personal aspects of her life, not necessarily the thoughts of the things. But keep that education idea front and foremost in your mind while you're looking through the passage. I think things will make a little bit more sense.
What was scandalous about her life? Was it her ideas or actually
Her first child, Fanny, was not married when she was born. They kind of faked her marriage. She wants to pretend that she's married while she's not. The father, Gilbert Imlay, is an American adventurer, wants nothing to do with her after the talent war. She attempts suicide twice. It's like those kinds of things where the argument is that she's too emotional of a writer,
she's not meant to
that it would lend to she's too emotional of a person, so her ideas can't really have any substance.
theory at
Yes, very much.
watch Black?
And BoJack
And so
Horseman.
that works.
Are you for 8th period?
Yeah.
Okay, I can come during study hall.
Okay, and it's gonna take like 3 minutes, I would think. Why don't you just, like, after 7, I would say just come here, and then I'll write you a pass and we'll go to study hall. Rather than having to read passes back and forth.
Yeah, alright, no worries. And then what did I miss during class, taking those notes?
Yeah, we were just going over stuff, which I'll post so you can see and certainly borrow others. The dates and whatnot, you don't need them for Friday's quiz, but it's more of context of what's going on within the article.
Alright, thank you.
Yep, I'll see you 8th
Yep.
and 6th.